Well, thank you for the kind introduction. I don't recognize myself in that, but I appreciate what he had to say. You may have noticed that he assisted me up here. I got out of the hospital recently, had an 8-day stay. They discovered some problem in my back, but what it's done for me currently, although I've never really been hungover, it makes me feel hungover. So I don't know whether any of you would experience that or not, but when I got up here, I was not quite sure if I'm going to stay with my head where it ought to be. So thank you for that, and I'm honored to be here. You know, your pastor, who is not here, he's in Cambodia, halfway around the world. I've had the privilege of being there a couple of times. It's a very different culture than this one. There's always the risk of people thinking the culture where they live is the culture everywhere. That's a very elitist idea. It's not. So he's in a very different place and stretching himself, I have no doubt. And to show that he's a cut above the average, he texted me yesterday from Cambodia to New Brunswick to say, you're going to be at Corbett tomorrow morning and I'm praying for you. How about that? So if you don't appreciate this guy, you're stupid. So I'm honored to be here. Just a couple little personal things. If you're timing the preacher, don't start yet, because I haven't started yet. I was the first pastor's kid to live in that house right there next door. You have a picture of my dad up there somewhere? You forgot to get it. That's all right. I'll execute you right after church. My dad came here in 1954 when I was 9 years old to pastor what was then called the Barker's Point Reformed Baptist Church. It was a basement church. It was sat on this piece of ground, and there was no house here. So way back then, before almost all of you were born yet, I lived for 1 year at 45 Charles Avenue around the street over here, a house that was owned by Otto Hughes, I think. Drove by it yesterday for the first time in about 40 years. And in 1955 in the summer, I'm going to be done this in a second. 1955 in the summer, my mother and father and I moved into this house next door. The parsonage had been built. That's how it was then. Every church that was worth its salt had a parsonage. That's how you did it. Now it kind of goes the other way because pastors stay longer and have their own homes. But that's where I started there, and I don't mean this to be morose, but my dad died in that house when I was 10 years old. And the first funeral I ever attended was in your church when my dad was buried here. And I was only 10. But this is the truth of it. My father's heart was weak and his faith was strong. God took him home. You know, one of the great things if you belong to God is the prospect of reunion. There are people I can't wait to see, and there's a few I hope aren't there. I have a list. Would you like to see it? So I'm pleased to have a limited and shared history with you, and I'm glad really to be with you this morning. And I want to talk to you a little while this morning about allegiance. About allegiance. We live in a day of mixed messages. You got that figured out. I went to stay one time at a Ramada Inn Convention Center in Rapid City, South Dakota, where I was speaking at a conference, and they had many rooms they had rented to various groups. So they were trying to promote two things at the same time, two unrelated events on their signpost out front. And it said, senior citizens discount, 40-foot water slide. I have pictures that I don't want to talk about there. I drove past an Irving car wash in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia one time, and they had a sign out front that said, car wash now open, we are serving soup. I think they have a little restaurant, but they're trying to make the point, I guess they were, that things were a little bit mixed in their message. I hope in these next few minutes you won't misunderstand what I am trying to say. That there will not be any mixed message to it. I want to talk to you about allegiance. There are 23 synonyms, according to the thesaurus, there are 23 synonyms to the word allegiance, and the first one, interestingly enough, when I checked this week, the first one is the synonym that's the only one in uppercase, is the word loyalty. So if you don't understand what allegiance is about, it's about loyalty. The nation of Israel was in a leadership transition. Joshua, who had been the effective leader, was now preparing to leave. And in chapter 24, the book that carries his name, we find the well-known words, choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. And then that broader context gives you the verses you see now. Fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshiped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But, catch this now, if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So that's what we're going to chat about that for a few minutes this morning. Interestingly enough, in preparing these remarks, it had slipped my mind that your pastor was in Cambodia, where I have been before, but I was in Phnom Penh one time, and if you want to travel from one part of the country to another, one city to another, you rent a scooter with a driver. They don't let you take the scooter, which is probably a good thing, and I'm a little lighter than I was, and I probably weighed about 240 then, and the young lad that was running the scooter was about 120 pounds dripping wet. And I got on the back of that thing and thought, how is this actually going to work out? And I do not speak Khmer, and he did not speak English. So the deal was, if you want him to give him any instruction, if you need to stop for any reason, tap him on the shoulder and point to the curb. So we were driving through Phnom Penh, and I saw something that caught my attention, and I wanted to stop. So I tapped him on the shoulder and pointed to the curb, and he pulled over, and I got off the scooter to take a picture. And I thought afterward, if he decided to drive off while I was taking a picture, I'd still be there, standing on the street corner. But what was it that made me want to get off of the bike and take a picture? This isn't halfway around the world, and hanging on the side of an apartment building there was a Canadian flag. It was about 2 meters wide and about 4 meters long, something like that, hanging right down the side of the building, and I got off and wanted to take a picture of the flag of my country being flown in a very different country, in a very different part of the world. It's called allegiance. I was riding on a train in London one time, and if you're familiar with British trains, you get on wherever you wish in the train, but if you want to go up to first class, you just keep walking out further and sit down, and when the conductor comes through, he'll take a little extra money for you because you did sort of an upgrade. So I was sitting up there, and the English conductor came by and told me how much British money he needed, and I didn't understand exactly the breakdown of British money, so I took some out of my pocket and put it on the table and said, "Take what you need." He said, "American, are you?" I said, "No, sir, I'm a Canadian." He said, "Same thing." I said, "Irish, are you?" Allegiance does funny things to you. We all have it when the national anthem is played, especially at the Olympics. There's just something about that. And Remembrance Day is coming up, just a couple weeks. We'll gather to honor people whose allegiance to our country and way of living was so strong and all-encompassing that they gave their lives for it. Should Christians be expected to do less? I wonder. He was born in Eisenbahn, Germany in 1483 rather, and ordained a priest in 1507 and died in 1546. He advanced a history-impacting belief that sparked the Reformation with his 95 Theses nailed to the cathedral door. His core centered around three beliefs: by faith alone, by grace alone, and by Scripture alone. He was labeled a child of the devil and a drunken German who, when sober, will change his mind, but he did not. And under the ban of the empire and the bull of excommunication from the church, Martin Luther uttered those words now famous, but must have seemed incredibly radical to all of his friends in that day, when he said, "My conscience is captive to the word of God. Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. May God help me." Then there was C.T. Studd, born to a wealthy family in 1860 in the United Kingdom, and he died in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1931 after serving as a missionary in India, China, and Africa. He turned his back on his career as a professional cricketer. He could have been, if you can think NFL or NHL, he could have been a professional athlete at the highest level, but he turned his back on it and on his family's considerable wealth and became a missionary. His life's declaration was this: if Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice can be too great for me to make for him. And his life purpose statement said this: some wish to live within the sound of church or chapel bell. I want to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell. It was said of him that he had given it all up for the cause. His name was Eric Liddell, a Scottish rugby player and sprinter. Born in China to missionary parents. If any of you, and many of you did, I'm sure, either saw or can remember a reference to the movie Chariots of Fire. It was the story of this amazing young man, born in 1902. He died in the German concentration camp in 1945. He won a gold medal in the 400-meter race and a bronze in the 200-meter race in the 1924 Olympics. In the surrounding drama, he refused to run a race on Sunday and withstood an appeal from the Prince of Wales to compromise his belief on that point. Now, don't misunderstand here. The core issue of this is not about running on Sunday. It's not about that. The deep core issue was his loyalty to what he embraced in his life as a non-negotiable in his faith. And his fidelity was not to the Prince of Wales, but to the King of Kings. Allegiance, I think. Then there was Jim Elliot, an American missionary from Portland, Oregon, who was born in 1927. He and 4 others were killed in the jungles of Ecuador in 1956 while introducing the story of Jesus to the Auca tribal people. He was 28. His widow, Elizabeth Elliot, told his story in a book entitled Through Gates of Splendor. And before leaving on the fateful journey to South America that resulted in his martyrdom for the cause, this 28-year-old man said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he can never lose." In these glimpses of history with these people, you have a wealthy cricketer from the UK, a priest from Germany, a sprinter from Scotland, a young missionary from the United States. They came from different countries. They belonged to different social strata. They came from different times in history. They had different educational backgrounds, and they served in different countries. But they shared a common, powerful proclamation with Joshua when they said and believed it in their behavior: as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. Can I have that bottle of water over there, please? You know, as a wise preacher knows when he's dry. I've met some guys never got that figured out. You're a little slow on the uptake on that one. Not all dry preaching can be helped by a drink of water. These guys I've mentioned to they're relatively well-known individuals, is what they are. And you perhaps have heard of them, or all of them maybe, but they were heroes of the cause in a sense. But there are vast numbers, ladies and gentlemen, people just like us, lesser known people, never celebrated for anything they did in some ways, but who were fully devoted followers of Christ, who lived out in this proclamation that as for me, I will serve the Lord. I had international responsibilities in the church, as Pastor Aaron made reference to, and I stood one time in a cemetery in Sierra Leone, West Africa. Took part in the ceremony to honor the missionaries, 9 of the first 15 who went from our own church back in the 1880s to serve there as missionaries, and these 9 of the first 15 had all died from black water fever. They called it then malaria. We now know it to be. And they testified with their lives that their allegiance to the proclamation that they would serve God at any price was not just a catchy phrase from an old Jew of 500 years before that. Fascinating book entitled Standing Fast said during the first 30 years of missionary efforts in Kenya, more missionaries, hear me now, more missionaries died than the number of converts who were won in the first 30 years. In the remote interior, missionaries sometimes arrived with their belongings stored in their coffins because they were resigned to the fact they never, ever, ever would return to the coast again. About 3 or 4 times in this little sermon this morning, we're going to do what I'm calling pause and ponder. Pause and ponder. So we're going to take about 10 seconds, and I wish you all would pause and ponder on this right here. Allegiance ignites a passion, and passion will demand action. Think about it. In the U.S. Civil War, which is more accurately called the War between the States, 1861 to 1865, during that time, in one of the army camps, a young teenage boy was observed running toward the front lines as fast as he could toward the enemy. And an officer called him by name and said, why are you running up there so fast? He said, golly, Captain, I'm running because I can't fly. Dedicated to do something to actually make a difference. There was a chorus back in the day we used to sing that said, God's way is my way and these are my people. God's way is my way and these are my people. I will never turn back from the way. So allegiance stronger than self-preservation. Allegiance stronger than self-preservation. Hear these words from the scripture that likely are there up there, like we'll be here. The king had built a statue of himself, or had it built, 30 meters tall and 3 meters wide, and there it was. And the proclamation came down from the capital of the area, Ottawa in our case, came down from the capital city of the whole deal, that you must bow down and worship before this particular image or you will lose your life. A capital offense not to bow. Say, I can't get my head around that. You didn't live then. And this is what happened. 3 guys got arrested because they hadn't bowed down. They disobeyed the law. They were arrested. And the king wanted to give them a second chance. And he said to them, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which are the name of these 3 guys, sometimes called my shack, your shack, and a bungalow. There they were. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O king, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand. But, even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. We trust God to deliver us, we do, but if he doesn't, we're not bowing the knee. Our allegiance, God, is to you. Back in the 90s somewhere, when one of the wars going on in the central part of Europe, my daughter, who was about, I suppose, 20 years old or so at the time, volunteered to be a part of a team that was going over to help refugees from Kosovo who were then living in Albania to be repatriated back to their home countries. Volunteers are needed to help, so she volunteered to go with World Hope. She and her others, some of them were even briefly detained by some German NATO peacekeepers. And I faced the typical North American questions. This is a promising young lady of about 20 years of age. She's gone to work in this unsafe place around the world. And I had people who loved Jesus who said to me, how could you let your daughter do that? It's not safe there. Pause and ponder on this one. Jesus never promised a safe journey. There's not one place in the Bible that says, I promise you a safe journey. But the overarching theme is he promises a safe arrival. It's not about the journey. The journey may be rocky or rosy, but it's the destination, the journey, the destination that is settled. Then there's allegiance stronger than security of position. The king's right-hand man was treacherous. As a result, all the Jews in the nations and the other nations that were controlled by this vast empire at the time were condemned to death. The king had a whole bunch of concubines around, but there was one woman who was the queen, and her name was Esther. You know the story, some of you, from the Bible. The king knew she was the queen, obviously, but Esther was a Jewess, and the king didn't know that. And he had passed a decree that was actually going to mean his wife would lose her life. Esther had been more or less reared by an uncle whose name was Mordecai, and she went to him and said, "What am I supposed to do here now? My husband is the king, and he's going to take my life or cause it to be taken, even though he doesn't know this is an issue with us." So Mordecai sent back this answer: "Do you think that because you're in the king's house that you alone of all the Jews will escape? For if you remain silent at this time," hear this now, "if we remain silent in our time, deliverance for the Jews or whomever else will arise from another, and who knows but that you have been sent to this royal position for such a time as this." Then Esther sent a reply to Mordecai: "Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa," that was the capital city, "who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for these 3 days and nights. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Pause and ponder this idea that true allegiance may require the courage to take potentially costly action. Being truly aligned with the cause of Christ will not always necessarily be safe and cozy and comfortable. Have you read the New Testament? Thirdly, that's a word that in a sermon is supposed to give you hope that the end is coming soon. Thirdly, allegiance is stronger than society's pressures. The church, let me go back to this for a minute. The pressure is unrelenting, by the way. If you had not observed it in our position, in our current culture, the intense pressure that the church is facing these days. And the pressure is unrelenting, increasing, and ever more strident. And fully devoted followers of Christ sense this in our current cultural space. I attended a conference a couple of years ago of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, and the president of the group was speaking to leaders that included myself and about 40 others from various denominational groupings across our country. And his strong admonition to us was 3 words: prepare for winter. Not particularly inspiring, but poignant. Prepare for winter. And ladies and gentlemen, the church has always had the responsible privilege to hold high a torch of witness against the dark realities of the surrounding culture. The true church has always had that. In a few minutes, not right now, but in a few minutes, we're going to transition to communion. You want to think about paying a price for the gospel? That's how the gospel got here. You understand? And our day is no different. In facing an unknown future, I, for one, want to rededicate my allegiance to the Master. I don't know what that means exactly, but I'm an old man. Not much for me. I'm 78 years old. I don't have much to offer God, really. But this crowd I'm looking at this morning, many of you have much to offer God. I'm old enough to be the father of half you and the grandfather of a third of you, and a friend of the 2 or 3 who are as old as me. So who knows what's out in front of us, you understand? It is a mistake. It is a trick of the enemy, I believe, for us to believe that everything will be just as it always has been. There's change afoot. There was a little chorus we used to sing in Sunday school. You remember Sunday school, that sort of antiquated thing we used to have? It said, "Dare to be a Daniel." Daniel was the boss of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He was the head dude of that old bunch back there. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, and dare to make it known. So pause and ponder on this idea. I, for one, want to trust the future to the God who already knows the future. It may not all turn out just like I want, but he knows it. James Ewell Brown Stewart was the name of a general in the American Civil War. His names were too many, so they took the first initials from his first three names, James Ewell Brown, which is J-E-B, and historians refer to him as Jeb Stuart. He was a major general in the American Civil War. He was from the Confederate side of the conflict, and he always signed his letters to his commanding officer, who was Robert E. Lee. He signed his letters with his actual letters with the four letters you see on the screen, YTCO. For a long time, I wondered what that meant. I had to dig around. I love history, and I had to dig around quite a while to find out what Stewart was saying to Lee every time he wrote him a letter, and turned out that's what he was saying. YTCO, yours to count on. Making the point, you understand, he was telling, you've already seen the point here, but I can't resist making it. He was telling his commander-in-chief that no matter what comes next, no matter what the enemy throws in our way, no matter what the circumstances of life are, I'm yours to count on. In my opinion, there's no more significant thing we could collectively and individually say to God himself this morning. No matter what happens, he's our commander-in-chief. Yes, no matter what happens, no matter how the circumstances change, no matter what allegiance to Christ may demand from me, I am yours to count on. That's the declaration of fully devoted followers of Christ. Because allegiance, you see, it's a fire starter. It ignites our involvement and our investment and our influence. So I wish that you'll consider in these moments, what does it mean to be a fully devoted follower of Christ, to actually show true allegiance?